Good afternoon. I want to start, at about, before I greet my guest, about how this idea happened to bring the guest here. When we were discussing the dramaturgy and the plan for today, during the melting pot on global stage, we decided to bring in people who have some impact who made some impact in their lives, and who help to improve other people's lives, very often with very high personal sacrifices, very often risking their own life. And I'm very, very happy that I can introduce Horia Mosadiq from Amnesty, long time Amnesty International researcher, and today she is a researcher, freelance researcher who is working still with Amnesty International, with UNICEF and with other international organizations. I want to go back in time a little bit. In 2002, I was deployed with CNN television in Kandahar, and I stayed in the Kandahar in Afghanistan guest house. And one evening, a young, beautiful Afghan woman started talking to me, and it was Horia. Horia was on assignment in Afghanistan with her colleague Anna Bori from Amnesty International. And what these two women did is incredible. They traveled from Kabul north, and they traveled pretty much through the entire Afghanistan, going from one prison to another to report on the conditions of prisoners to Amnesty International. And we unfortunately met only very last leg of that journey of Horia, but we became friends and we started talking, and Horia started telling me her incredible life story and what she went through and her family went through. And today, to me, Horia is a symbol of what happened to Afghanistan in the last 40 years. It's a really fascinating story, and I am very happy that Horia is willing to share it with you. So now I've stopped talking, and I will ask you to tell me a little bit about, before we go to Afghanistan, which is today completely war-destroyed country, which is heading in no right direction. Tell me, how was it in your childhood when you were growing up in Afghanistan, where we are growing up, how that was?
Yeah, thank you so much, Thomas. I think it was also incredible to meet you in Kandahar. Someone who was walking around with his camera and a fixer and going to mountains where Taliban were hiding, and you were bringing all those books and notebooks and everything from those caves. So I think at the time when I grew up in Afghanistan and when I was a child, it was absolutely a different Afghanistan. And what I'm seeing now is totally unknown to me. As a child, my father was a local politician, and I grew up in a family that I was seeing my mom would go out with her mini skirt, with no headscarf and with no sleeves shirt. My sister was going to school with her mini skirt, with a school uniform that almost every girl was wearing in Afghanistan. And we were also going to music festivals, the same that you people are going here, and especially if it was celebration of Independence Day. I remember, because my father had to travel for his work from time to time, and like my mom, a young woman with her mini skirt with 3 kids, she would just walk us at 12 o'clock in the night, and we would go and spend 3-4 hours in the music festival, and then by 4 o'clock in the morning she would just walk us back home. If we could find a taxi, or if the driver was here, that was a kind of luxury. But if we couldn't, we would often walk, and no one was there even to look at my mom or us and why she's dressed in that way. And also in those years, like my auntie, she was a very young and pretty woman. She used to study in Kabul University. And she was traveling for her summer vacations and winter vacations between Kabul and Herat by bus with a bunch of other young girls from university. And you would just get in on a bus with their jeans, with their mini skirts, and you would travel all the way, and it was absolutely fine. And it was a very, very peaceful and tolerant society, which is unfortunately not known to me now.
One part of your story you told me, it stuck with me over the years, is tell me about what your uncle did for living, and you know what I'm asking about. Can you tell the story?
Yeah, my uncle, he was having a hotel in Herat, and the hotel was mainly, they were hosting tourists from all over the world and who were passing through Iran and coming to Afghanistan and going to Central Asia and other places. So then he was hosting from time to time also some very famous people, like at one point he said that Bob Marley stayed in his hotel and they were having a great time and things like that. So then every Friday evening they were also having these musical events with all these tourists from around the world who would perform, who would enjoy, and yeah, it was incredible.
Yeah, I don't know, you know, I spent so much time in Afghanistan and I had no idea. I just recently find out that, for example, Duke Ellington, one of the biggest jazzmen in history, performed in Kabul in late 1960s. So it used to be a really extremely open society. As Horia said, I saw books in Afghanistan. Afghanistan used bookshops with pictures from, black and white pictures from university where girls really indeed were wearing miniskirts. When I was in Kabul, Kabul used to have a trolley bus system which was built by Škoda, by the Czech Republic, and most of the drivers were women. So it was an open-minded Central Asian society. Well, what happened next? When the things started to turn wrong or bad for your family and you?
Yeah, I think I was very young, and it was, I think, at the middle of the night, and suddenly we heard the noises of the gunshots and rockets, and it was quite shocking. For the first time we were hearing those voices, and then we were all rushed into the basement, and like I think within a few minutes or an hour time, my dad told us that there was a coup d'etat. And we didn't know what was happening. There was no news on the radio, and we were just stuck and sitting in the basement, and we didn't know what will happen next. And that was unfortunately the beginning of a war era in Afghanistan. I'm talking about 1978. When communist coup d'etat happened in Afghanistan, and it overthrew the president, and then a communist regime started to establish in Afghanistan. And later on in 1979, Russia physically came with its troops, and they took and occupied much of the country.
What happened to your family? Did you stay in Herat, or what happened to your family? What did you do?
Yeah, well, after war started, it wasn't that bad, but still then what we saw, the next thing after communist coup d'etat and Russia invasion, the West and US found a golden opportunity to start supporting these so-called mujahideen and resistant groups to fight Russia. And this was the time that we have seen Islamic fanatics started rising here and there. And as a child, I have seen that how school girls were targeted by the Mujahideen groups, supported by the West, supported by the America, how schools were burned, again supported by USA, supported by the Western countries, and flow of weapons came to the Mujahideen groups. And every day, like we were seeing, girls were getting poisoned in school. one day I remember I was very young when my sister came, like she left for school and then she came shaking, and my mother rushed to her and she asked, what happened? She said, we were walking with our teacher and someone walking by the bicycle just shot her in the head and she just fell in front of her. And she was just year 6 or year 7 student. And this was the time that things started like getting bad. And I think somehow we Afghans started paying the price for a Cold War between Russia and West and America. Like both America and Western countries, as well as the Russia, they started using Afghanistan as a human shield, and they turned us to a country where we are now, and this is because of what they have done to us.
What year did you have to run? You ran first, you have to escape. You have to run first away to Pakistan, I believe. Can you tell about your life on run, what happened?
Yeah, well, back by 1983, literally the security situation in Herat became so bad that the Mujahideen resistant groups, they started targeting almost government civil servants, school students, teachers, and like the situation became so unbearable. And then my father, in order to buy us safety, he was paying for my sister and my brother who were going to school to one of the Mujahideen commanders. He would pay them on monthly basis, so they are not killing them, they are not harming them. And then because I was little, I was like literally, I could sneak, I could get away. And one day when I came home, I saw that there was a man with his turban sitting on our terrace at the yard with my father. And as soon as I walked, suddenly I saw my father's face has changed. And that man looked at me and said, are you going to school? And I said, yes. And he didn't say anything, he knew it. I went inside. And then my father came and he said, this is absolutely impossible because now you're saying that I have to pay for the third child or, anything can happen to you guys. So this was the time that we had to move from Herat and we came to Kabul where we started living, and leaving almost everything behind ourselves in Herat.
Then you came to Peshawar?
To Islamabad, yeah. And
Islamabad.
then as we were settling in Kabul and the situation started to getting better, like we were all going to school and university and the situation was like getting a little bit settled. Suddenly, then the communist government collapsed. Russia pulled out of Afghanistan. And then the same Mujahideen groups, they came back to the city and a civil war started in Afghanistan. A civil war between different Mujahideen groups that literally they started attacking and killing anyone because of the language they were speaking, because of the ethnicity that you were belonged to, or simply if you were living in an area that belonged to a rebel commander to another Mujahideen group. And it was also on that time when hundreds of girls were kidnapped, raped, and killed, and our home was rocketed on that time. My younger brother, he was killed, my other brother was injured, and that was the time that we decided that we had to leave the area, but we didn't leave Kabul yet. And then we moved to another location. Then we saw the situation got even worse. So this was also the time that my family wanted to leave Afghanistan, but then I was in love with my husband, and then we decided to marry at the middle of the war. So yeah, and then my mom and my sister, they went to Iran, and then I and my husband, we married and we stayed in Kabul for another 9-10 months before the situation got even worse. And on that time, I was working as a journalist. And I was under threat, and then I had to just leave the country, and I went to Pakistan, and I started working as a journalist in Islamabad back in 1995.
Then came 9/11. When 9/11 happened in the attack on the Twin Towers in New York, were you in Islamabad?
No, I was in Iran.
You were in Iran?
Yeah.
Then came the invasion of Afghanistan. Well, Taliban took power in what, 96, 97?
Yeah.
Was there any consideration coming back during Taliban? Because Taliban did manage to pacify the country to a point. I mean, under very brutal circumstances, but besides the north part, it was under... Have you ever considered coming back to Afghanistan during the Taliban time?
Yes, I did, because I was working as a journalist, and then by 1996, another group which was called the Taliban, I believe it was 1994, when they started taking shape in Quetta, 12 religious students, they managed to rescue a UN convoy, and they catched the news headlines. And within 1 year, they turned into another aggressive power who wanted to implement Sharia across Afghanistan. And this was the time that by 1996, they almost captured many parts of Afghanistan. And by 1997, I believe it was almost 90% of the Afghanistan was under the control of the Taliban. And one of the reasons that many people were allowing Taliban to wash out through and come was because Taliban were promising that they would disarm all the Mujahideen groups. They will make the way for the ex-king to return to Afghanistan, and then there will be a transition of power. Many people who were fed up with the war, especially with the civil war, they decided to support the Taliban. But as soon as Taliban started gaining ground, then the scenario changed. They started implementing Sharia law, they banned girls from going to school, they banned women from leaving their homes, they forced men to grow their beard, wear shalwar kameez, and go 5 times to the mosque. And people who wouldn't go, they would be severely punished. People who would trim their beards, they would severely punish. And women who were not wearing the full face burqa or leaving home without a male accompany, they were also severely punished. Public executions became very, very occurrent, or I would say on daily basis on Afghanistan stadiums, especially Kabul Stadium. Women were executed for extramarital relationships by the Taliban. Men were amputated because someone has stole a piece of bread, or someone has stole something, or executions because someone killed someone else. They were becoming like publicly in the daylights at the stadium of Kabul, and also in other places around the country, and many people would come and watch the situation. So this was also the time that I, as a journalist, I was traveling back and forth under my burqa, having my daughter with me, and my husband, and we would just sneak in Afghanistan, and I would bring and collect the stories, and then I go out to Islamabad, and then I would air it. Unfortunately, this is how it was. Then it was 99 when I decided to go to Iran to visit my mom and my sister. And then it was the time that my mom didn't let me to come back to Pakistan, because it was, after such a long time, it was a reunion. And, you know, I think we really wanted to be together on that time.
That came 9/11, that came American invasion of Afghanistan. Did it, overthrown of Taliban regime, did it bring any hope? Did you think this might be it? Maybe now the things will become better in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I think I was in Tehran, and it was around 1 o'clock midday news, and I was watching TV, and suddenly I'm seeing like plane crashes into the towers, and then I think, why they are showing a scene of Hollywood movie at the middle of the news? honestly, it was just like, you know, we didn't know what's happening. And suddenly in the news, they were saying the Twin Towers have been attacked. And then we followed the news, and then, you know, the number of people that were killed and the number of, you know, like other attacks that happened across US. And we were quite shocked, and we didn't know, you know, what the hell is happening in America. Just few days later, then suddenly we saw George W. Bush, the junior, and US administration, who claimed that because the attacks were orchestrated by Al-Qaeda, and now they are planning to go to Afghanistan to attack and hunt for Al-Qaeda members. And on that time, when they started the kind of, I would say, the attack on Afghanistan, we were quite fearful, because we were thinking like the country has already been into so much, and we just don't need more bombs. So then the bombings happened, and within a month time, Taliban were gone. And then everyone was talking about Bonn Conference, and new hopes started shaping everywhere. And then millions of Afghan refugees from all over the world, they started returning back to Afghanistan. And I myself, I returned with my family in early 2002. And then I started working for Amnesty International on that time. And we had so much great hopes that, you know, finally there is an end to the war. Taliban are gone, Mujahideen are gone, and now Afghans can get on with their own lives and, you know, just to take a breath with peace.
What inspired you to switch from being a journalist to working for Amnesty International? What was the interest?
Well, I think because as a journalist myself, I was covering quite a lot of war and atrocities that were happening in Afghanistan. And I was seeing the suffering of people, especially civilians. And for me, it was like being a journalist is great, and you're doing a lot of stuff to raise awareness all over the world. And like someone sitting in Czech Republic would know what happens to Afghanistan or Syria or Libya or North Africa. So this is the great work that journalists were doing. But what I wanted really to do is to be more effective, to change the lives of people in the ground, and if I can do anything. So that was the time that I decided to switch to human rights and dedicate my life to this.
So that was 2002 when we met in Kandahar. Then, how long did you keep working in Afghanistan, and when did you decide to leave and work in London for Amnesty International? Can you tell me about that change?
Sure. Back, as Thomas said, in year 2002, when I started working for Amnesty International, I was traveling almost all over the country. And first job that I did with the Amnesty International, it was to monitor the prison situations across Afghanistan, because it was right after the Taliban, and there was no law, no rules, and the country was just, I would say, like even when we were going to police stations, police didn't have a uniform. When we were going to the courts, the judges didn't have a law textbook. And when we were going to government offices, even there wasn't chairs and desks for the civil servants to sit. And from that situation, like we started working, and we did quite a lot on not only on the rehabilitation of prison systems, but on the rehabilitation of the law enforcement institutions in general, which was police, judiciary, and other bodies. And that was also the time that I started proactively working with the victims of war. And the reason that I started working with the victims of war was that what I have seen, what US did in 2001, when there was a Bonn Conference in Germany to set an agenda for the future of Afghanistan, and it was hosted by USA and Western countries, again, they brought the same Mujahideen groups to power. this was the time that, we all Afghans, we called for accountability to the past human rights abuses. We called that all these perpetrators have to go to the court and they have to answer to what they have done to the country. But unfortunately, the USA, the United Nations, and the Western countries, as well as the Afghan government, they were not interested in justice. And I remember that the UN Special Envoy, Lakhdar Ibrahimi, he said that we cannot sacrifice peace for justice. So that was the time that I started proactively working with the victims of war, and I was documenting their stories, and I was running a lot of campaigns against many people who were in power in Afghanistan. And I was standing against very powerful warlords and human rights perpetrators who were holding positions from the vice president of Afghanistan to being ministers, to being members of the parliament, and they were everywhere. And I started receiving a lot of death threats. And then I was also lobbying that, we managed to bring some changes in the law that anyone who is committed human rights atrocities and violations in Afghanistan, they shouldn't stand for the elections. But then that law was changed from accused to convicted. And then many of our European and Western friends, unfortunately, they stood against me. And even diplomats were just calling me that I was a crazy woman. And I staged several demonstrations in front of the EU, in front of the United Nations, in front of the President's office. And
in Kabul.
In Kabul. And I was motivating these people to stand for their rights and ask for accountability. The situation got quite worse, I would say. Not only death threats became a daily occurrence to me, but then suddenly the attention was shifted to my children and to my husband.
You mean threats and attacks?
Attacks, yeah. From the threats, it took to attacks. And there was one day my husband just ran to my office and he just rushed inside. And I was saying, what happened? He said, come here, I want to show you. And when I went, 3 bullets were shot at his car. So luckily he survived. One was just past his ear and hit the back of the chair to hit the door and windscreen. So luckily nothing happened to him. We reported to the police, nothing happened. And then the next thing was that my eldest daughter, when she was coming from school, someone attacked her with a sharp object. We don't know whether it was a knife or something. And they wanted to slash her throat, but luckily, when she was she did like that, and that cut her face through from ear to ear. And then this was also the time that, and then the person who was behind the burqa, she screamed, people rushed, and he or she, whoever was under the burqa, they ran away. And then there was another kidnapping against my eldest daughter, and then against my second daughter. So the situation started to getting really worse. My office was attacked, and no one was doing anything about it. And then this was also the time that I thought, this is my fight, and I don't want my family to pay for that. And this was the time that I decided that I would take my job with Amnesty International to London, where I moved my children and my husband to London, but I kept going back and forth to the country till now.
By the way, Horia was in Afghanistan last week, and she's heading there again in 2 weeks?
Tomorrow.
2 months?
Tomorrow, yeah.
Tomorrow? Yeah,
Tomorrow.
Oh, sorry. So she was there last week, she's heading back to Afghanistan tomorrow. Why didn't you quit? I mean, the situation in Afghanistan is getting worse and worse and worse and worse. Aren't there other jobs out there you can do? Why do you travel back? And you just told me a couple of minutes before this presentation that you keep receiving death threats. Why do you do that?
Well, honestly, I think this is because what I strongly believe in justice. I really, really strongly believe that one day justice needs to come, and nothing would deter me from that mission. Even just in June, I was in Bonn, and I was having a same panel with the ex-Afghan president, Hamid Karzai, and he was talking about peace and reconciliation with the Taliban, and I was talking about justice and accountability. And at the end, he just came to me and he said, listen, sister, let's forget about justice. Let's get on with the peace, and justice could be preserved later. I said, no, sir. 17 years ago, you, USA, Western countries, and United Nations said you cannot sacrifice peace for justice. 17 years on, we lost the peace and we lost the justice. If we had justice, we would have had peace. There is no shortcut to peace. And this is my mission, and nothing would deter me, and someone has to do the job. So, and also I think what is really, why I'm doing it, I think it is quite a long time ago that I overcame my fear. And when I received my first death threat, it shook my back. And second time when I had a death threat, when someone just came by my home and he held a gun to me, I felt a very cold sweat, and I didn't show any sign of fear to him, but I was really, really scared. But now I'm not scared anymore. And I think because I overcame my fear, this is why I'm doing it, and I will do it. I know what is waiting for me, but yeah.
But what gives you the strength? I mean, you've seen more than the whole area here, these 40,000 visitors visiting this festival. You've seen more than all of them combined. What keeps you strong? What, is it a faith? Is it this belief in justice, in this belief that you are actually fighting for the right thing?
Yeah, I think this is belief that I have in justice. This is the belief that I have that what I'm doing is the right thing, and this is the mission that I have on behalf of millions of Afghans who have suffered in the past 40 years and nothing has been done to them. And they were betrayed on and on and on by the governments, by the international community, by the UN, and by whoever. I was in The Hague, and I was meeting with the International Criminal Court back in May, and I was pushing, please start your mission in Afghanistan. Without justice, the only thing will happen, the cycle of violence, the cycle of victimhood will increase and will become bigger and bigger, and we have to end that. And the only thing that can bring an end to the current situation is justice.
I've been to Afghanistan many times between 2002, and last time I was there was 2012, and I saw this situation deteriorating. As we discussed, like in 2002, I could travel freely through the country and I felt fairly safe. Today, I would not probably survive longer than day two traveling without security and what have you. I've worked in more than 60 countries around the world, and I have to tell you, I've never seen level of poverty like in Afghanistan. That country, I mean, nobody of us can imagine what these people went through. Afghanistan has you probably know it, over 1 million widows. Afghanistan has millions of orphans. Everybody has suffered in those 40 years of war, which was actually not brought up by Afghans. It was by other powers. And the situation is getting worse. Do you have any hope for Afghanistan?
If I didn't have hope, I would just sit home and I wouldn't do anything. And this is the only thing that keeps me driving. There is always a hope. And I have seen in Afghanistan that at the middle of extreme hopelessness, something miraculously happens, and then you just think, yes, we are here, and I think we are in the right track. So, yeah, I think I hate to say that I'm losing my hope. There are times that I have lost my hope. There are times that I became so hopeless, and I was just looking, and I didn't know what to do and what will be my next step. But then there are also, and suddenly I think, no, if I give up, if thousands of other people they give up, then it means that the wrong people are winning, and we shouldn't let them win. And I think I will be like a small mosquito buzzing in their ear and making their sleep bad, you know, and I would love to be that buzzing mosquito. And I'm not a big person, but I want to continue with thousands of other buzzing mosquitoes. We don't have weapons, we don't have power, and the only power we have is our speaking out and our pens, and that's it.
Tell me, you work very closely with ordinary Afghans, and you monitor their cases, you collect their memories and their witness accounts. What happened to the nation like that? I mean, what happens to the people's mind? What happens to the people's behavior? Because, you know, there are some estimates. You know, to collect any data in Afghanistan is extremely dangerous and it's almost impossible. But there are estimates by what I've read by World Health Organization that over 90% of Afghan population live in clinical depression, that over 90% of Afghan women are either sexually or physically or both abused. How people's minds change after 40 years of atrocities?
It is really difficult, honestly. I want to, just in relation to what you said, imagine back in 1980s when Afghan students were in Peshawar camps and the schools were supported by the West and by America. The textbooks that they were giving to the children in the schools, it was saying, my father killed 2 Russians, my brother killed 2 communists, 2 + 2 is equal to 4 infidels. This is what Nebraska University of USA has printed and taught to our children in refugee camps. And this is how they embedded a culture of violence in my country. And this is how they brought that situation that we are now. And also, someone like me who was maybe 5 or 6 years old at the time when war started in Afghanistan back in late 70s, is now, I'm 45, and then, you know, we have seen nothing but human rights violations, atrocities, and being betrayed, and the only way that you can survive is that you should have some sort of power and defend yourself. And I also believe that what really happened in the whole situation, and when you're living in that kind of extreme situation, it can either make you an extremely negative person who can turn into atrocities and violence, or it can turn you into someone more positive that you can say, I want to end that. And now in Afghanistan, we are dealing with these 2 type of, I would say, generations or people. And also I think the other sad thing is that our older generation are not there anymore. You would barely find any Afghan who is above the age of 75 or 80. One of my own relatives, they had someone has died in their family, and they were commemorating in a mosque. So he's 45 years old. He was sitting there, and then the mullah came and said, why you're sitting here? Can you please bring your elders to sit here? He said, I'm sorry, I'm the eldest person in my family. And with having those people who have seen better days of Afghanistan getting killed, getting imprisoned and disappeared, and having the new generation which have seen nothing but human rights violations and atrocities, it is a very, very difficult task, but we have to change that narrative. If we don't change that narrative, the situation will not change at all.
You know, I have to ask you one more time, or, you know, maybe differently. I mean, given what we just said, what you just told us about Afghanistan, I mean, it sounds to me almost like it's some sort of Don Quixotic fight you are doing. You know, fight you have absolutely at the moment no chance to win. You know, there is so much violation everywhere. How do you believe this kind of persistence, and there are not that many people like you, how do you think that sort of persistence can change something, you know, because you are fighting against incredible powers, you know, and people, you know, in power, Mujahedeens, Taliban again, different groups of Taliban, people who are profiting from the wars, you know, from that war and from that conflict. How do you think your work can change this?
Well, I think we are seeing a little bit of changes. We are seeing in the younger generation who are more interested in education. We are seeing that younger generation are believing that they deserve better in their life. And we are seeing that younger generation are standing up at least for their own rights and for their sisters' rights. And some incredible changes are happening here and there with like small sparkles, I would say like maybe like a small tea lights at the middle of the darkness, and it's exactly like that. For example, a tribe in Khost province in eastern Afghanistan, which is an incredibly insecure place, they all came together and they issued a resolution that whoever stopped their girl from going to school, the community will find them and they will drive them out of the village. So, for example, in Kandahar, many young men last year, they came out with their cars and they were carrying blue flags for the education, and they were saying that the honorable man is to allow their daughter and sister to go to school. Like, you can see these kind of like small changes happening here and there, and these are the I would say like the forces of hope for me and for many people like me, that we think, okay, it is working, it is hard, it is difficult, it is not easy, but it is working, and we have to keep going and we have to continue.
I would like to talk about one more latest war you do, and then we would open the floor for some questions. Last week, the United Nations published a report that Afghanistan, the casualties, civilian casualties in Afghanistan are all in all-time levels. I mean, there is not a single time. Open a newspaper today, go on BBC website, go on Reuters website, you will see something happened bad today in Afghanistan to absolutely innocent people. Meanwhile, there are a lot of refugees, Afghan refugees in Europe now. And some European EU governments, such as Holland, the Dutch government, Finnish government, Norway government, they declare Afghanistan a safe country, and they are returning these refugees. Not only that, you know, one thing Horia is specializing at the moment is a lot of these governments are returning unaccompanied minors, which means people who are younger than 18 years old. They are repatriating them back to Afghanistan. Some of these kids have never been to Afghanistan. They were born in refugee camps in Pakistan, refugee camps in Iran. Tell me about what you are trying to do, with whom you are working, and how big is this issue and problem?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. As you may know, there have been a flow of Afghan refugees to Europe in the past few years. And unfortunately, what we are seeing that back in 2016, the European Union signed an agreement with the Afghan government, and because Afghanistan is highly dependent on international aid, so they said, you will sign this documentation to accept countless number of refugees back to your country, or we will not give you any aid. So as a result, like when I was talking to some Afghan officials on that time back in 2016 in October, who signed that agreement and accepted that European countries would give them money in return for accepting the refugees that are deported from Europe. And they said, for us, we had to make a tough choice, whether we accept 30,000 Afghan refugees from Europe or we will let 30 million people to die. So what is the choice? We sacrificed 30,000 people for the favor of 30 million people. So, and he said, like, this is a cup of poison that I had to drink it. And now we are seeing, like, European countries are returning countless number of Afghan refugees, and some of them are unaccompanied minors back to Afghanistan. They believe that Afghanistan is safe and it will be okay to return them. Many of these people, as soon as they are returned, there is, like last week, just an Afghan committed suicide who was deported from Germany. And there are tens of other similar stories that you would hear from Afghanistan. So when I was meeting with several EU officials in the past few months, I was just giving them a challenge. I was saying, I would pay for your 1 week holiday. Will you go with me to Afghanistan? And then they were saying, why should I? It's not safe. I said, if it is not safe to you, how do you think it is safe for a refugee to go and to be returned? Is our blood, our life less than you? And like, if you look at the much poorer countries like Pakistan, like Iran, like Jordan, and Turkey, who are accommodating millions and millions of refugees from Afghanistan, from Syria, from Libya, and other countries, and then you put all these 29, 30 more European countries, the richest countries in the world, with high human index, with high income, and they are not afford to accommodate a couple of thousand of refugees who just came here fearing for their lives. And this is, I really don't believe. And I think for me, what I have seen, there is always a double standard, and how a person of my skin color works and how someone with a different color will work in this country. Even I'm seeing it when I deal with immigration officials or even other places.
You know, the thing is, the question or the topic of refugees is extremely sensitive issue in Europe nowadays, you know, and it's been politicized, you know, a lot of populist parties, a lot of right-wing parties are taking advantage of that issue and what have you. And, you know, one of my arguments, you know, also, you know, not just the Afghan refugee groups, you know, but also the refugees from Iraq, from Syria. You know, the thing is, I have to defend, because the thing is, it is a West-made problem. I mean, the seed of ISIS, the seed of the collapse of Middle East, of Syria, of Yemen, of Libya, of Egypt, of Iraq, was seeded in 2003 by that absolutely useless invasion of Iraq. And if the Americans would invest 5% of the money they wasted in Iraq, in Afghanistan, we would see a different situation. So do you think these countries owe something? Because, you know, the whole collapse of Afghanistan started by the communist coup in 1979, which was highly supported by Soviet Union and orchestrated by Soviet Union, then by the invasion of Soviet Union, of Afghanistan by Soviet troops, then the proxy war against the United States. Should the international community, especially these countries which were perpetrators in this conflict, do something more for the Afghanistan and Afghan refugees?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is something that, you know, I always say that in the past 40 years, we are being killed for a war that is not ours. We are not being killed for the weapons that we have never produced. And our homes were destroyed by the rockets that even we don't know how to make it. So someone must have been making a lot of money out of war in Afghanistan and in Middle East. And why they are initiating war, why they are creating wars, why they need to send their soldiers to bomb and kill and commit all these atrocities. So someone must benefit out of all the situation. And because this is a man-made disaster in Middle East and in Afghanistan, and the very people who are responsible are the Westerners and US countries, they should take some share of responsibility for what they have done. They should, at least, if they are not doing their full job in supporting the country, building infrastructures and helping people to thrive, but at least they can do something for the people who came at the back of their doors. And this is what I would ask them.
We have around 10 minutes left. I will open the floor for the first time, if anybody has any questions. They will bring a mic to you. That will be easier. It's right here on the...
Thank you. So you said that when in the 70s the overturn of the government happened, you were quite little, right? You were small. And I'm wondering if you ever asked your parents if there were any signs before that overturn of the government in between, like, and he was a politician, right? Or he is
Yeah, my father was a politician, but unfortunately he became too depressed with the situation. He said he couldn't support communists because they were standing against all the values and rights that he was believing. And he couldn't support Mujahideen because, again, they were standing in the wrong side and supporting all the beliefs and values that he was standing for. So this is why none of my parents took any side, and until my father passed away 20 years ago, he never took any government position, he never did anything, and he decided to stay where he was.
But I think what you meant is, did you see it coming? Yeah. Did you see it coming? Did you see that there is something going to happen? Was it?
Yes.
And how, please?
Yeah, definitely. I think I remember when Russia invaded Afghanistan and when the war started, my father would always say that it will be another Vietnam. And I didn't know what was Vietnam, and he kept saying that it will be another Vietnam. And then I remember once my mom and my dad, they had like a conversation about that, and my mom was saying that I think Palestine issues will be settled, but Afghanistan issue will not settle the way that I'm seeing it. So, yeah, here we are.
And were there any indications that the communists will take power in 1979? Was there any indication? Was there any...
No.
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 It just came out of nowhere.
It just happened, yeah. It just happened.
Thank you very much for answering and also for a very enlightening talk.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Meanwhile, I have one more question. When you mentioned these death threats now, when you travel back to Afghanistan, I saw your lovely children last month in London. Do they realize what do you do for work, and what do they say to that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was 2013 or 14 when my eldest daughter wrote a letter to me, and it was published by Marie Claire magazine, a letter to my mother. And I think, sorry, it makes me a bit emotional. I think for the fight that I believe, I always have to sacrifice my children, and they are also paying a price. They know what I'm going through, and but at the same time, I always tell them that I would like to die as someone who did something, rather than someone who just sat and didn't do anything and watched.
Thank you. There were a couple more questions there.
Now I'm emotional too. How do the Western governments actually justify to see Afghanistan as a safe place? Whatever you read, it just says otherwise.
Well, I think their justification is that still there are places within Afghanistan where you can live. They say Kabul is a safe place. Kabul has the highest number of civilian casualties across the country. They also point at two other provinces, Panjshir and Bamiyan provinces, and these provinces are mountainous areas that even it cannot feed its own citizens, and they are extremely impoverished provinces that people flee those places in order to find work in other provinces. So yeah, I think their justification is, I think, as nasty as their policies are.
I wanted to ask, I think that you must have witnessed so much impotence from the international community, the organizations failing to help you in what you're doing. But imagine now that they all started functioning as they should. How long do you think it takes to rebuild a nation? How many generations do you need to start a country which is functioning in its basics?
Well, I honestly, I think it takes decades, and this is a very right question to ask. Unfortunately, what we have seen, not only in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in many other conflict countries, that the international community is always after quick fixes. There is no shortcut to building a nation. There is no shortcut to rebuilding a country, especially a country that has been through so much war and so much atrocities. And I would say, honestly, it will take at least 2 generations in order to bring that country. Look at Europe, you know, after Second World War, how many generations it took to, you know, to deal with the scale of the atrocities that have happened. And it's not easy, you know, it just stays at the back of your head all the time. You know, like, I would say, like, you know, someone like me, there are nights that I suddenly feel like someone has shot at the back of my head, and I suddenly wake up, and still I feel dizzy, and I think that I'm hit with a bullet. Before even I think I'm in my bed, I touch my head, and then I say, no, it's not blood. Oh my God, I'm sitting in my room. Oh, probably I hit my head to the bed, or something has happened. And it will not go away so easily, and it will stay.
I want to answer one part of this question. You know, I saw some demining, United Nations demining teams in Afghanistan, around Kandahar region, around Kandahar area, in 2003, 15 years ago. And I asked them, how long will it take to demine Afghanistan, to clear it from mines? They told me 70 years, 70, if there are resources to do that. Imagine this, 70 years to clear all the mines in that country. It's incomprehensible.
Yeah, and also I think I just want to add that there was a survey back in, I think it was in 1990s, that they said for every Afghan citizen there are 15 landmines everywhere. And those landmines were planted by Mujahideen, by Russia, by communists, and by everyone involved in the conflict.
We have perhaps space for one more question, if there is. Can we have a mic, please? Oh, you know what, I can let you know. Yeah.
My question was partly answered by you, because I was wondering if there are any means how to, you know, make food, I mean agriculture, how is the situation, you know, that people concerned about making a living, yeah, and you partly answered that I think that, you know, the ground, the soil is covered by mines, yeah, and so that's my question, if people can really make on living, on basic living, I mean, produce something to be able to live there.
Yeah, people are trying to make a living, and as Thomas said, there have been like massive operations of demining happening all over the country, and people are trying to do something, but unfortunately the poverty is so bad that I think more than 50% of Afghan population live below the poverty line, and this is to do with not only years of war, but also I would say destruction of infrastructures and basic livelihood for many people. So, you know, people are surviving. In Afghanistan, we often have a proverb, and people are saying, no one have seen the grave of someone who has died from hunger. Like the belief that hunger will not kill you. But if you see at the life expectancy, which is 45 for women and 44 for men, poverty and hunger has to do something with it. When you see that out of every 1,000 live birth, around thousands of them are dying before reaching to the age of 5 is as a result of hunger and poverty. We haven't seen someone who will die from hunger, but we have seen so many people are dying causes that are initiated by the hunger and by poverty.
We have 2 seconds left. Horia, thank you very much for sharing
Thank you.
this. I have a massive, huge respect for you.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you.